I hadn't seen my family since my divorce, so showing up to my sister's baby shower felt like walking into a minefield with lipstick on. The living room looked like Pinterest heaven, but behind the smiles I felt like the ghost no one wanted to see. Still, I smiled, pretending to be okay. Then I noticed a photo on the celebration wall, Sophie and my ex-husband. It wasn't just a coincidence. My stomach turned. Was this the real reason my marriage ended? And why did Mom glance away the moment I reached for it that day? I thought I'd just be invisible. I had no idea I'd be annihilated. I hadn't planned to stay long. Just make an appearance, hand over the gift, smile politely, and slip away before the conversations turned suffocating. But as I pulled into my parents' driveway, I felt the old tension clawing at my chest. The kind that came not from the big fights, but from the little silences, the practiced smiles, the knowing looks exchanged when I turned my back. The front door was already open. Balloons floated gently above the entrance, pastel pink and cream. I walked in, carrying a wrap box and a bottle of sparkling cider. Sophie saw me first. She rushed over with that practiced squeal of excitement and arms outstretched, belly first. "Claire, oh my God, you came," she sang, as if I were the prodigal sister returning from war. I hugged her. Her perfume smelled like vanilla and something synthetic, the kind of sweet that turns sour if you breathe it in too long. I wouldn't miss it, I said, because it was the thing to say. Mum approached next, a tray of macarons in one hand. She looked immaculate, like she always did when there was an audience. Hair set, makeup perfect, and smile taut. "Claire, honey," she said, "you look tired, but I'm so glad you're here. Sophie's had such a difficult pregnancy. This party is a little bright spot." I didn't ask what was difficult. I wasn't meant to. The living room had been transformed into a soft, floral wonderland. A long table held finger foods and cupcakes shaped like rattles. A string of ultrasound photos hung above a fireplace, garlanded in white roses. A memory wall stood near the corner, covered in pictures of Sophie. Childhood, high school, engagement, pregnancy. I walked toward it, letting the crowd swallow me. A few distant cousins waved, but I kept my eyes on the photos. Then I saw it. The image was tucked in the middle of the board. Sophie and David, my ex-husband, smiling together at some vineyard. Her hand rested on his chest. It wasn't recent, but it wasn't ancient either. I knew the shirt he was wearing. I had folded it. That photo was taken the summer before we divorced. My chest went still. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe they ran into each other. Maybe it was a group event. But the intimacy in the picture argued otherwise. Sophie never mentioned it. David never mentioned it. I stepped back, forcing a smile as a couple walked past me. No one else seemed to notice, or they did and pretended not to, just like old times. I headed to the drinks table. My hands trembled as I poured a glass of water. Behind me, voices rose in excitement. Someone was playing a game with tiny plastic babies frozen inside ice cubes. I took a breath, and then I felt her beside me. "Crazy, right?" Sophie said, eyes on the photo board. "Mum really went all out this time." "Yeah," I replied, careful. "Looks like a magazine spread." She sipped her mocktail and tilted her head toward me. "I heard David's moved back to the city. Have you talked to him?" I blinked. "No." "Oh, weird. I thought you might have. He sent me a message the other day just saying congrats." My throat tightened. "He congratulated you?" "Well, yeah, he was happy for me." She smiled as if it were nothing. "We've always gotten along, haven't we?" I stared at her. The innocence in her tone was a mask, and it was slipping. "Did you two ever hang out before the divorce?" I asked, trying to sound curious instead of accusatory. She laughed. Too light, too loud. "Claire, what are you saying?" "I'm just asking," she shrugged. "You know, you used to be so paranoid in your marriage. Maybe that's why it didn't work out." It hit like a slap. That gaslighting tone. Familiar. Before I could respond, Mum's voice rang out across the room. "Claire, come over here. Aunt Janice wants to hear about your new place." I walked toward them, jaw clenched. Aunt Janice smiled, but her question was a dagger in a smiley sheath. "So Claire, what happened? You and David were together so long. Was it infidelity?" I swallowed. Sophie stood behind her, looking mock-shocked, eyes wide. I don't want to talk about it here," I muttered. "Oh, sorry. Of course," Janice said, though her eyes sparkled with curiosity. Then Sophie chimed in. "It wasn't really infidelity, Auntie. They just drifted. David told me once he felt like Claire didn't really see him." I froze. That sentence. That exact sentence. David said those words to me when he left. I turned to Sophie. "He told you that?" Her lips parted, a slight hesitation. "Oh, I mean, I don't remember exactly how he said it." I nodded, slowly. Inside, something shifted, cracked. Something I'd buried with paperwork and therapy sessions and wine nights alone. Sophie leaned closer, voice soft. "He actually almost didn't buy that engagement ring, you know. He wanted something else, but hey, who cares now, right?" My heart stopped. That ring, he'd told me that in private, in the most vulnerable moment of our engagement. I looked at her, really looked. She smiled like she'd won something, and suddenly I realized I wasn't at a celebration. I was at an execution. I spent most of the party floating. My body stayed, but my mind slipped into old rooms I thought I'd sealed shut. Memories sharpened like blades, the kind that don't cut until years later. I was 13 when Sophie slapped me for the first time. We were fighting over a sweater, nothing serious. She was 11, small but sharp, and when her palm hit my face, I screamed. Mum came running. I thought she'd be furious, but she looked at me, not her. "What did you do to upset her?" she asked. I had no answer. Just a red cheek and a feeling that something had shifted permanently. That was the first time I understood. Sophie could do anything and be forgiven. I could do everything right and still be blamed. Back at the party, a familiar voice pulled me from my trance. "Claire?" I turned. It was Jamie, an old friend from college. We hadn't spoken in years, but she hugged me like no time had passed. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, jobs, life, mutual acquaintances, until she tilted her head toward the photo board. "Did you know I saw David and Sophie together once?" she said casually. "I assumed it was a family thing." My heart paused. "When?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "I think late summer last year, at that bar downtown, the one near the river. They looked cozy. I even waved, but they didn't see me." I smiled stiffly, said something forgettable, and excused myself to the bathroom. Once inside, I locked the door and pulled out my phone. I opened my old text threads with David, scrolling through the months leading up to the divorce. My fingers trembled. Nothing blatant, nothing obvious. Just long silences, sudden coldness, excuses. Then I opened the call log I'd kept backed up, something I hadn't looked at in forever. There it was, a call from David at 2:14 a.m. Duration 16 minutes. The contact, just the letter S. I copied the number, opened WhatsApp, pasted it in the search bar. A profile appeared. The picture was of Sophie. Smiling, radiant, visibly pregnant. I stared at it for a long time, the way someone stares at blood on their own hands. Not shocked, just confirmed. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just sat there, phone in hand, and listened to the party echo through the thin bathroom door. Laughter, games, applause, I wasn't part of it anymore, if I ever had been. Later that evening, after the cake had been cut and the guests had started drifting toward the door, I found Sophie in the kitchen alone, rearranging plates. Her back was turned when I said her name. She didn't jump. "I know," I said. "The baby. It's his, isn't it?" She turned slowly, face pale. For a second I saw the little girl from our childhood, defensive, trembling, then it vanished. Tears welled in her eyes. "Claire." "Don't," I said. "Don't cry to manipulate me. I didn't mean for it to happen like this." "But it did." She looked down at her belly. "We didn't plan it. He said you were already drifting apart. I believed him." "Of course you did," I said, "because he was your prize, and I was just the obstacle." Her voice hardened. "You always think you're better than me. You always had the good grades, the attention, the pretty engagement, the house. I was just the screw-up, the one who couldn't hold a job, the one who—" "You were the golden child," I snapped. "You were never held accountable. You could burn the house down and Mum would hand you a match." She flinched. Then she smiled bitterly. "You know what David said? He told me you stopped looking at him like he mattered, that you only saw yourself." My throat tightened. "He said you weren't desirable anymore." The words landed like bricks, heavy, calculated. Sophie watched me for a reaction. I gave her none. I stepped closer, almost whispering. "And you believed him because you needed to." Her lip trembled. I turned away, walking back toward the living room, where the party had dwindled to a few guests, chatting near the door. I felt nothing and everything all at once. The numbness was a relief, better than rage, better than grief. But something had broken open inside me, not like glass, like a door. I should have left before the speeches. That would have been the smart thing. But smart had never been my armour. Survival, yes. Silence, absolutely. But never the strength to walk away before the storm hit. The crowd hushed as Sophie tapped her glass gently with a spoon. Her cheeks were flushed, either from nerves or the glow of everyone's attention. My mother stood behind her, eyes shimmering like she was about to receive an award herself. "I just want to thank everyone for coming," Sophie began, her voice cracking delicately. "This pregnancy, it wasn't something I ever thought would happen for me. I was told a few years ago that I might never carry a child. It broke me." There were sympathetic murmurs. She looked down, one hand resting over her belly, the other squeezing her eyes as if holding back tears. "But then," she continued, voice rising, "something changed. I met someone who made me feel whole, like I was finally worthy of something beautiful. And that's when the impossible became possible." My throat clenched, my legs tensed as if preparing to flee, though I couldn't move. "I think it's time," she said, her eyes locking onto mine, "to stop keeping secrets." Every breath around me froze. "The father of my baby is David." For a full 5 seconds, the room was absolutely silent. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the fizz of champagne bubbles, the tick of my own heartbeat, then faintly a clap. 1, 2, my mother. She stepped forward smiling as if this were the moment she'd been waiting for. "I'm so glad you finally said it, darling," she said, patting Sophie's arm. "We've all known, and it's wonderful. He's a good man. a stable one. I didn't know I was standing until I realised my glass had fallen to the floor. It didn't shatter. It just rolled lazily away. All eyes turned to me. But I wasn't there. Not really. I was floating again. Only this time it wasn't memory, it was detachment. A hollowing. I looked at Sophie. Her face wasn't apologetic, it was triumphant. I looked at my mother. She didn't look surprised. She looked satisfied, and I realised this wasn't a reveal, it was a ritual, a crowning. Sophie was the new queen, and I was the sacrificial lamb they'd bled dry. I sat back down slowly, palms pressed to my knees. My fingers dug into my own skin, deeper, deeper, until I felt warmth beneath my nails. No one noticed. After the final game and a few scattered conversations, the guests began to trickle out. No one mentioned the announcement again. No one asked me how I felt. They moved around me like I was furniture. And maybe I was. I drove without knowing where I was going. City lights blurred into streaks of white and gold. Somewhere I pulled into an empty parking lot, thumb trembling as I opened David's contact. I typed one sentence. "Did you ever love me?" The message was seen in seconds. No reply came. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. At some point, I remembered a night months ago, right after the divorce was finalised. Sophie came to my apartment with takeout and a blanket. She held me while I cried, rubbed my back, whispered, "You deserve someone who sees you." I had believed her, and now those same words played back like a joke I didn't understand. I ended up at the bridge without remembering how. The wind was sharp, slicing against my skin like truth. I leaned over the railing. Water roared beneath me, not as an invitation, but as an option. The cold crept up my arms. My mind, exhausted, circled questions I couldn't answer. Was I ever enough? Was I ever real? My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I shouldn't be telling you this, but you should know." Attached was a screenshot of a conversation. Sophie, talking to someone named Marla. The message, "I aborted the first time, he wasn't ready, I didn't think he'd stay, but this time, I knew he was mine. Claire was just in the way." A second message followed from the same number. "Did you know? She'd been seeing him since the first year of your marriage." I gasped. The cold air vanished. The bridge disappeared from my thoughts. Rage replaced sorrow. Fire replaced fog. I stepped back from the edge. Not today. The next morning I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't even flinch when I looked at myself in the mirror, hair tangled, face pale, eyes hollow. Something inside me had hardened, not broken, not cracked, hardened like steel forged under heat. The night before had burned everything away but my will. I opened my laptop. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, only that I needed to understand. I typed in phrases like sibling betrayal, maternal favoritism, narcissistic families. Within minutes I fell into a rabbit hole of stories that mirrored mine too closely. Golden child, scapegoat. The words hit me like thunder. The golden child idealized, protected, given credit even when they fail. The scapegoat. Blamed, ignored, used as a dumping ground for the family's dysfunction. I wasn't imagining it. I had been the family's emotional trash can for decades. I dug deeper. Sophie's infertility story had never quite added up, and now I knew why. I messaged one of her old co-workers under a fake name, posing as a journalist. Within an hour, I had screenshots of a conversation where Sophie admitted she lied about her diagnosis to gain sympathy from her then-boyfriend, David. I copied the conversation and saved it in a folder I titled Truth. Then I remembered the recorder app on my phone. For the past few weeks, I'd been using it casually, mostly for therapy notes. But something made me go back and scan the audio files. There was one from a few days ago, the morning of the shower. In the kitchen, I pressed play. My mother's voice came through, clear as crystal. I never wanted two girls. One was enough. Sophie had charm. Claire was always too serious, too intense. My breath caught. I skipped forward, another gem. She always needed so much, emotionally. I couldn't deal with it. Sophie just knew how to be light. The file ended with laughter. Not Sophie's, my mother's. My fingers trembled as I uploaded the audio to my computer. I stared at the waveform. Every second was another brick in the wall I was going to build between me and them. I opened an email to my lawyer. Subject line, urgent, family defamation and evidence attached. The audio file, screenshots, and notes from my journal. I typed one sentence in the body. I'm ready to destroy the image they've built. Then I hit send. The rest of the day passed in quiet vengeance. I worked with surgical precision, organising evidence, building a timeline. I downloaded a template for a WordPress blog and began designing a layout. Black and white, simple, honest. The blog name? The Second Daughter. That night, I drove across town to visit someone I hadn't seen in years. Mr. Holden, my high school English teacher. He had been the only adult who ever saw through the facade I wore. When he opened the door, his eyes lit up with the same warm sharpness I remembered. "Claire Bennett," he said, stepping aside. "I always knew you'd return with a story." We sat for hours. I told him everything, not for advice, just to be heard by someone who wouldn't flinch. At the end, he nodded. "You were always sharp, but your sharpness came from silence. Now you're using your voice. That's evolution." I drove home with a strange peace sitting in my chest. The next day, I began rehearsing. I stood in front of my phone, camera on, face out of frame. I practiced my voice, measured, calm, precise. I told my story as a narrator, not a victim. I wove in facts, screenshots, audio clips. I blurred names, but not truths. When I was ready, I posted the first video on a private YouTube channel and embedded it into my blog. I didn't share the link. I didn't have to. 3 days later, a journalist named Rachel Vaughan from a mid-tier investigative site messaged the blog's contact form. "I think your story needs to be heard," she wrote. "Would you consider speaking off the record?" I stared at the email. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to my lawyer instead. It started with one post. A Twitter thread by the journalist Rachel Vaughan breaking down the anonymous story of the second daughter. Screenshots, audio clips, redacted names that anyone with a hint of local gossip could decode. Then the storm hit. Within 24 hours, the blog's traffic exploded. Thousands of shares, dozens of YouTube reaction videos. Strangers in the comments calling the story a modern Greek tragedy, gaslighting in its purest form, a masterclass in generational manipulation. And then the recognition started. A woman commented, "I went to school with Sophie, always thought she was too close with Claire's husband." Another wrote, "I remember seeing Sophie and that man at a concert, looked romantic. I assumed they were a couple." Within days, private messages started pouring in. Former neighbours, a college roommate, even an ex-friend of my mother's. They'd all seen it. They'd all suspected. None had said a word. I didn't respond to most. I just read and let the truth settle into the open air like smoke from a long smothered fire. Then the call came. Mum, I let it ring the first time and the second. On the third, I answered. Her voice was soaked in panic. Claire, she began, what are you doing? You're destroying our family. I said nothing. Your sister lost her job today. They don't want to be associated with this filth you're spreading. The media's at our house. Your aunt won't return my calls. People are talking. You mean they're listening? I said. She sniffled. This isn't justice. This is vengeance. No, I said calmly. Vengeance would have been burning it all down years ago. This is documentation. There was a silence. Then, broken and sharp, her voice returned. You always wanted to tear us apart. You were always jealous. That old, tired refrain, the scapegoat's anthem. I breathed slowly. Then I told her what I had waited decades to say. You broke this family when I was 6 years old, Mum. When you looked me in the eye and chose Sophie, again and again. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just refusing to protect the lie anymore. Click. The line went dead. I sat in silence for a long time, not crying, not shaking, just still. That afternoon, Sophie issued a statement through her employer's PR team. Private family matters, it read, unfortunate mischaracterizations. But it wasn't enough. A leaked HR email showed she'd been placed on indefinite leave pending review. I received emails from major outlets. One even offered a book deal. I ignored them all. The blog remained anonymous. I didn't want fame. I wanted the silence broken. Then something unexpected happened. My Aunt Janice called. I've read everything, she said, and Claire, I believe you. I always knew something was wrong, but I was scared to speak. Your mum, she wasn't just cruel to you. She did the same to your cousin, remember? Called her damaged goods when she got pregnant at 19. One by one, more relatives began reaching out. Small stories, big wounds. My mother's legacy began to crack under the weight of collective memory. Sophie tried one last tactic. She went on a podcast, teary-voiced, full of wounded pride. My sister always hated that I was the favourite, she said. She's rewriting history to make herself look like the victim. But the host wasn't soft. She asked about the audio, about the screenshots, about the timeline. Sophie stumbled, repeated herself, contradicted her earlier interviews. The comments weren't kind. At the hospital 2 weeks later, I found myself outside Mom's room. She'd had surgery on her hip, complications from a fall. I hadn't planned to visit, but I wanted closure. Not for her, for me. She looked smaller than I remembered, pale, older. She didn't look surprised when I walked in. You win, she said. They all turned against me. I sat down beside the bed, careful not to get too close. I didn't do this to win, I replied. I did this to live. She turned her head away. I loved you both, she said quietly, in different ways. No, I said, you loved a version of Sophie that mirrored you, and you hated the version of me that didn't. She didn't argue. I stood to leave. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly. I didn't take it. I forgive you, I said, but I'll never forget. Then I walked out, the door clicking gently behind me. The first time I saw my book on the bestseller list, I was sitting in my pajamas, eating cold toast and ignoring a call from a news outlet. The Golden Lie had gone live just 2 weeks earlier. I self-published it through a quiet imprint. No big launch, no press tour, just words, just truth. The title had been Rachel's Suggestion. Fitting, she said, sharp, memorable. She wasn't wrong. Reviews poured in, raw, emotional, grateful, messages from strangers thanking me for saying what they hadn't had the words to say. Survivors, children of narcissists. Women who had been gaslit for decades. Even men who had lost themselves trying to please the unpleasable. And then came the invitations. Claire Bennett, author, speaker, survivor. I stood on stages with soft lights and rows of eager eyes. I spoke about family systems, the golden child dynamic, the scapegoat burden, about how silence isn't peace, about how love without accountability is just control in disguise. At one event, a young woman approached me afterward. She was maybe 20, barely taller than my shoulder. She clutched a worn copy of my book, underlined and dog-eared. "Your story saved me," she said. "I thought I was crazy. My mum always said I was the problem. But now I know I'm not alone." She asked for a signature. I wrote, "You are never the problem for wanting truth." As I handed the book back, I smiled at her. "I'm not a victim," I said softly. "I'm a survivor." She nodded, tears in her eyes. I left the stage with my heart full, not from pride, but from knowing I'd broken a cycle. Eventually, the noise faded. I didn't chase more speaking gigs. I turned down television interviews. I wasn't interested in being a brand. I wanted to rebuild, so I did. I bought a small cabin near the woods, tucked away from the city. No neighbours in sight, just trees, birds and quiet. I planted vegetables. I adopted a shaggy dog named Otis, who followed me everywhere, even into the garden. In that silence, I rediscovered my voice. Mornings were slow, coffee on the porch, journaling, reading, sometimes just breathing. I started painting again, not for skill, just for colour, for chaos, for joy. One weekend, while picking up supplies in town, I ran into Evan. He had been my friend in college, a fellow writer with an easy laugh and a patient heart. We hadn't seen each other in over a decade. He recognised me instantly. "Claire?" he said, blinking. "Wow." We caught up over coffee, then over dinner, then again the following weekend. There was no rush, no pressure, just presence. He didn't ask about my past until I offered it. And when I did, he listened like it mattered. One evening, as we watched Otis chase moths near the porch light, he said, "You're not just surviving anymore, you're living." I smiled. "Yeah, I think I finally am." Letters still came, though fewer now, emails. Handwritten notes, messages from people in all stages of awakening, some just realizing their trauma, others halfway through escape, a few already free and searching for meaning. I read each one, I replied when I could, some I just held to my heart and whispered, "Me too." The days passed gently, seasons turned, and slowly I grew into someone I had never been allowed to be, whole, unapologetic, free. One morning, after feeding Otis and watering the garden, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I stared for a long time. The lines around my eyes, the calm in my gaze, the softness of my mouth. I didn't see the lost girl or the broken woman. I saw me. For the first time in my life, I whispered to the glass, "I am myself. Finally." And I smiled. Not because someone else was proud of me, not because I'd won something, but because I had returned to the only place I ever needed to be, home within me.